I'm Heather. I've liked fantasy and dragons ever since I was small because they provide something different and exciting in comparison to our own reality. In our world, there's pollution and unnecessary wars. Well, in fantasy, there might not be any of these things at all, or at least ones that I can easily escape from. Dragons also interest me because they are authority figures of the world in most stories. They are intelligent and able to stand up for themselves, save the world from humans. I found it refreshing to have a story where the animals can stand up for themselves for once, have a say on how our world is treated. Both fantasy and dragons are in my story, The Dragon's Bargain. I hope you enjoy it. Twisting his wrist tightly around the reins of his mount, Hunter harshly yanked her to a stop. The intercom gave a low whinny of fatigue, her long, spiraling horns sparking and sputtering. She pawed the ground as Hunter slid off, lashing her reins to the nearest oak. He grasped one of the many knives at his belt, pulling it out of its delicately decorated sheath. His gaze was riveted on a jagged peaked cave. While the interior was hidden behind a shroud of thick darkness, an occasional belch of sickly green smoke could be seen, trickling out. Hunter smirked, tightening his grip and slinking sideways into the thick underbrush on either side of the cave. When he got to the side of the cave, he slowly inched his way to the opening, curling his fingers around the heat-blasted stone. Unbroken heat shimmered from the yawning opening. Slowly he turned, sticking his head into the opening. Inside, a massive blue dragon was curled around an ice. Inside there, a single glistening crimson egg sat, its edges covered in smoke. The mother dragon blew a few thin tendrils of flame over the egg, sending more smoke to pour from the cave entrance. Covering his mouth with his elbow, he pulled out of the cave and shimmied back into the undergrowth, giving a light cough. Settling down on an open platform of rock near the back of the cave, he set his knife next to him on the stone. He knew the mother dragon would need to leave soon to find nourishment, and then he could get to work. He had just begun to doze, leaning himself against the warm stone, when he heard a thunderous growl that made his ears ache. Jolting into a crouch, he wrapped his fingers around the knife and quickly shimmied to the entrance. The blue dragon was dusting its massive muzzle from the gloom, its teeth bared as it drew in a breath. Shuffling her way out, she swung her head side to side, narrow, toad-like eyes glaring into the gloom. Finally, she spread her leathery wings with a snap, raising them until they touched and slamming them back to the forest floor. Dirt and leaves rose into the air as the dragon quickly lifted up, a ferocious roar ripping from her lips. Hunter knew that she would fear no predators for her precious egg, for only the bone, claw, or tooth of a lumbering dragon could pierce the egg, and no dragon was permitted to live in these parts but her. Hunter, however, crept into the den anyway with a final glance over his shoulder. He quickly trotted up to the crimson egg, running his fingers over the warm, almost painful surface. Hefting it up, he started it with his arms and pressed the egg to his chest, feeling the heat trickle through the leather into his skin. He labored over the corner of the cave, sitting cross-legged with the egg, resting in the curve of his legs. He drew the blade over one of his fingers before placing the tip at the top of the egg, settling in for a long wait. It was 5 hours past before the mother dragon got back, and by then, Hunter's head was woozy from the thick smoke circulating, and the blistering heat blasting his face. Shoving her way in roughly, she let out a roar of fear as she saw her only egg missing, and then one of anger as she noticed the man sitting in the corner. "Release my egg at once," she hissed, her tail lashing and striking the cave side, sending loose a cascade of rocks. "Only if you agree to my terms," Hunter replied with a coy grin, twirling the knife over the egg surface. The dragon watched the movement before giving a huff and laugh. "You cannot harm my egg. Why should I not blast you now? Turn your bones into a pile of soot." Her voice, he decided, was quite like the mixture between the hiss of a snake and the scraping of 2 giant boulders. "That is where you are wrong. See this blade?" He indicated the creamy white blade with a loving stroke. "This is the tooth of a dragon, carved to make the sharp blade of a knife. And you know that I could slice this egg open as easily as your claws rip through the skin of a farmer's cow." The dragon froze, her eyes widening slightly. "What is it you want?" she whispered hoarsely, her eyelids fluttering shut in defeat. Hunter pulled a phoenix feather from his neck with his free hand, throwing it across the cave to land at her feet. "Enchant this with your magic. Make it so every stroke of this pen against parchment will never run dry of ink, for as long as I shall live. Do you promise to leave me and my egg alone afterwards?" "Of course," he grinned. The dragon nodded then, bending her head to the feather. She placed the rigid end of her snout to the tip of the phoenix quill, blowing smoke over the frills from her nose. Then she pulled back her head and sent the feather flying across the ground with one thrust of her giant snout. "It is done," she growled, her wings giving a nervous shuffle as she watched Hunter reach for the quill. his knife still pressed tightly against the curve of the thin egg. His fingers stroked the stem of the quill tenderly before he curled his fingers around it and tied it around his neck. He then proceeded to curl one arm underneath the egg and hoist it up, giving the mother a threatening glare. "What are you doing?" The mother snarled, starting forward with bared teeth. Remember the knife," Hunter barked. The mother stopped, but smoke began to billow from her nostrils as he walked, slowly sliding by. Suddenly, with a screech that was so sudden it sent the female rearing, Hunter threw the egg and shot forward, plunging the thin blade of his knife deep into the underside of the dragon's jaw. "I saw you getting ready to off me once I released your precious brood," he growled, narrowing his eyes. The dragon gave a single groan of surprise, her large body thudding to the ground. He pulled out another knife that had a much larger and sturdier blade, and set to work. After 4 days, he managed to butcher the entire dragon. Ushering in his ride, he quickly packed up his numerous dragon-laden bags, and nestled the egg into his large leather saddlebag. Then he rode away from the blood-stained